when a step seems too hard to take. Every turn is a big mistake. Makes you want to close your eyes and hide. Trust yourself, even if you're scared. Don't give up, don't give in to fear. All the strength you see, you'll find inside. Open up, spread your wings and rise above the clouds in your mind that bind you to who you really are. Don't waste your time, no one else can live your life. Open up to what you've known all the time. You are more than you are, you are. Speak your mind, make a statement. Don't hide yourself out in the open. Step into the spotlight and shine. I'll be the change, fall like a domino. Chain reaction sets the world aglow. Be amazed at how it falls in line. Open up, spread your wings and rise above the clouds in your mind that blind you to who you really are. Don't waste your time, no one else can live your life. Open up to what you've known all the time. Round and round and round we go, we don't fall down. More than flesh and bone, heart and soul, light and miracles. You are more than you are, you are more than you are, you are. Open up, spread your wings and rise above the clouds in your mind that blind you to who you really are. Don't waste your time, no one else can live your life. Open up to what you've known all the time. What you've known all the time. You are more than you are, you are more than you are, you are more than you are, you are.
Please join me in prayer. We're so blessed to be able to come together in week 2 of the month of August 2026, where we look at the fear and the furious. And we're so blessed to have a way of life that teaches us to view fear and to learn how we can make it a compass when it arrives. We're blessed to be able to come together to celebrate our oneness. I'm so grateful for that, for everyone who's come together to make this service possible. I know that everything that takes place here today will be absolutely perfect. And give thanks for everyone who will hear these words, who will hear this message, either here in this space or online. I give thanks for the world that we live in, and the opportunity that New Dawn has to create a world that works for everyone. I give thanks for each and every beautiful individual expression of the divine here to help celebrate our oneness today and release these words into that law that knows how to mold, make, shape, and create all the good there is, everywhere, all the time. I let this go, I let it be, and together we affirm And so it is. I worked really hard again, young Dr. Dave, to find some quotes from Ernest Holmes. And, because there's so little to choose from. He's written many books. And these are things I found that I thought would be in line with our discussion today from many of these. His first quote comes from the Science of Mind text on page 155. Faith is a mental attitude that so completely accepts a thing that it becomes a reality in the believer's experience. We can make stuff. Co-create with the divine. Yeah. Our second one also comes out of the textbook. It says, there's something at the center of your being that knows what to do and how to do it. Who knew? Our third quote comes from this thing called you. My favorite Ernest Holmes quote, there's a power for good greater than you are, and you can use it.
Good afternoon, New Dawn. What a joy it is to be with you. How good it is to come together once again. As Russ alluded, our theme for the month is the fear and the furious. And today we're exploring fierce clarity, when fear becomes a compass. And our question of the day is, what if fear isn't a warning, but a doorway to clarity? So, thank you for joining us, whether this is your first time, whether you've been coming for years. We are a radically inclusive community, honoring all people, all faith traditions, all paths to the divine, including those not on a faith path. So wherever you are, whatever your journey, you are welcome here. So last week we explored anger, not as something to suppress, but as something to understand. We discovered that anger can be a catalyst for love if and when it's guided by wisdom. And this week, we're taking another look at another emotion most of us spend a lifetime trying to avoid: fear. Now, if you're anything like me, you've heard the backronyms. That's a new word for me. Where you have some words and then you work backwards and put it into another word. So the backronym for fear is false evidence appearing real, or forget everything and run. I've done a little bit of both. I don't know about you. But what if we face everything and rise? So if I asked for a show of hands, I suspect that every one of us could name something at some point in our lives that we were afraid of. Maybe it was that exam in school. Maybe it was going to school in the first place, getting married, getting divorced, fear of rejection, fear of failure, fear of getting older, fear of dying, fear of illness, fear of change, fear of public speaking. Yes, it ranks right up there. It remains one of the top 3. Folks really don't like doing this. And as you know, I teach this at Metro State University of Denver. I teach public speaking, and I can assure you that in the past 4 or 5 years that I've been there, we have a 100% survival rate. So eventually, right? It may not feel like it in the moment, and that's what I call a spiritual victory. When we allow ourselves to be in the scratchiness of what we don't know, but we're doing it anyway, right? We're the cowardly lion, where we embrace our courage and we move forward. So we've been told fear has had a bad reputation for a very long time. We've been told to conquer it, to ignore it, to push through it, to pretend it isn't there. But what if we've been asking the wrong question? What if instead of asking, how do I get rid of my fear, what if we asked, what is my fear trying to teach me? That single shift changes everything, because fear might not be standing in front of the doorway. It might actually be pointing us toward it. So as we've been enjoying our call and response the past few months, when I say, I choose courage, you'll respond with an open heart. With an open heart. Okay, let's try it. I choose courage. With an open heart. When fear whispers. With an open heart. When life changes. With an open heart. Yeah, one more time. I choose courage. With an open heart. And that is our guiding light for today, beautiful people. I was introduced to the writer Gerald May when he writes, "Fear is not an enemy, but a friend." Now, I don't know about you. That's not something Grandma had embroidered on a pillow when I was growing up, right? Fear our friend? Really? Yet the more I sat with those words, the more they began to make sense. I invite you to think about it as well. Fear wakes us up. Fear gets our attention. Fear asks us to notice something. Now, sometimes fear is pointing toward genuine danger. If you're up in the Rockies and you're on a hike and a bear comes onto your trail, fear says, run, and preferably faster than the person you're with, right? So it's probably not the best time to stop and have a theological discussion. Fear has done its job. But most of the fears that shape our lives aren't physical bears. They're stories. They're the stories we create, the stories we've been told, and the stories that we tell ourselves. What if I fail? What if people don't like me? What if I make the wrong decision? What if I say the wrong prayer? What if I'm not enough? So, my friends, I invite you to consider that these fears really don't protect us. They often imprison us. Again, one of our favorite authors, my buddy Russell and me, Ernest Holmes, says, the only intention would be to allow the individual the freedom to discover themselves. What a beautiful freedom. Think about that. God isn't trying to keep us small. God isn't trying to make us afraid or turn tail and run. Divine life is continually inviting us into a fuller expression of who we already are, right? Perhaps fear isn't standing between us and our purpose. Perhaps it's standing at the edge of our next chapter. So I invite you to consider, what are you afraid of? Not from a threatening, bullying kind of way, but what can this inform for me as I increase my consciousness and expand my thinking? What am I afraid of? And what does this fear mean? How can I continue to explore that? So the first point I want to invite you into is fear as a teacher, not as a tyrant. Fear becomes powerful only when we stop listening and start obeying, right? Fear absolutely has a place on the bus. It informs our decisions. We touch it a little bit every day, I would suggest. Fear deserves a voice. It doesn't deserve a vote, right? So when fear says, pay attention, wonderful. Pay attention. Listen. When fear says, don't try, you're going to do it wrong, you bonehead. No. That's a different conversation when fear takes charge. So I encourage you to ask questions like, what part of me feels threatened? What truth is trying to emerge? Deeply spiritual questions. Because often fear isn't about what's happening outside, it's about what's happening inside of us. And as I shared last week, sometimes fear is the first emotion. And when we spend time in that process, it's rarely the last. So I've noticed something over the years, like you know, my beloved dad. Every time I got a new job, he was so happy for me. And he would say, once again, "Pal, you change jobs like I change socks." And I said, "Dad, if I'm getting a gold watch, I'm buying it for myself. I don't think I'm going to be anywhere that long." At any rate, the moments I've been most afraid have often been the moments just before something wonderful happened. The first time I stepped into a classroom at Metro. The first time I stepped behind this podium as your minister. The first time I did a wedding, I was in that joyful celebration of two people in love. The first time I was entrusted with a memorial. Every one of those moments created fear, carried fear, not because they were wrong, but because they mattered. Sometimes fear is simply our soul recognizing that we're about to grow, right? It's the spiritual version of buckle up. Marianne Williamson famously wrote, "Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure." I wonder if that's true. What if we're less afraid of failure than we are of discovering who we really could become? Science of Mind teaches us that we're individualized expressions of infinite spirit. If that's true, then every time we choose courage over comfort, we're becoming a little more who we were created to be. Fear stops being a prison. It becomes a compass. It points toward growth. It points toward possibility, toward the next expression of our highest self. And perhaps that's why we're here, not to become fearless, but to become faithful. Second point I want to invite you to consider today is clarity on the other side of fear, or as I call it, a spiritual victory. It may not feel good when we're in the middle of it, and then we get on the other side and the light bulb goes off. Now I understand. Now I know why this is what I was supposed to learn. Clarity doesn't always arrive before we take the first step, right? We've all heard the adage of building the plane while we're flying it. We've all heard the adage of working without a net. Sometimes clarity arrives because we took that first step. Clarity often emerges through challenge rather than comfort. We discover who we are not only in moments of peace, but also when life stretches us beyond what we thought we could handle. You know, I see that bumper sticker on occasion for those who still have bumpers and those who still believe in stickers. God doesn't give us more than we can handle. Part of me says that's a whole lot of hooey, and part of me says I want to believe it, and maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Wouldn't it be nice if God sent us an email? Subject line, "Everything is going to work out. Here's the complete 5-year plan." Awesome. My little structural brain would be so happy. Maybe even color-coded with GPS directions and links. But that's rarely how Spirit works. Instead, we're given enough light for the next faithful step, and then the next one, and then the next one. You know, I mentioned last week when my friend Kelly was here that I had the opportunity to officiate her wedding last year in October in Aspen. And Rick and I loved it, and we loved spending time with the family. And we left early the next day, and we were driving back. And it's October, in the middle of October, in Aspen. And it was snowing, and it was sleeting. And I said, Rick, would you like me to drive? And he said, no, I can either have White Knuckles being the passenger, or I can have White Knuckles being the driver, right? So he drove, and that is what that's about. Our headlights didn't illuminate the whole journey. We got to trust that beyond the 50 or the 100 yards that we could see, there was more road, and there weren't animals in it. So somehow, we got to know what was enough. Faith isn't seeing the whole road. Faith is trusting that the next stretch will appear when you need it. So it reminds me of one of my favorite scenes from Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. Any fans of Indiana Jones? Okay, everybody, yay. You might remember the moment. Indy, we're on a first name basis. Indy arrives at the edge of what appears to be a bottomless chasm. His father's journal, played brilliantly by Sean Connery, his father's journal tells him, only in the leap from the lion's head will he prove his worth. He looks, and there's no bridge, just empty space. Everything in him says, don't move. But eventually he takes one step and discovers there was a stone bridge there all along. He simply couldn't see it from where he was standing. Now, I don't recommend testing this at Red Rocks or the Royal Gorge, but spiritually, haven't we all had moments like that? There comes a time when life asks us to trust beyond what we can currently see. Isn't that what being a person of faith is all about in the first place, right? I believe even though I can't see it with my human eyes. We don't leap because we're certain. We leap because we've learned that God has been faithful before. And if God has brought us this far, perhaps Spirit already has the next bridge waiting. That is fierce clarity. That is standing in your power. That is being anchored in your truth. Not the absence of uncertainty, but confidence in the presence that walks with us. So I would illustrate that by sharing with you, several years ago, I was working with someone who was considering leaving their corporate position that they had spent nearly 20 years building. On paper, it looked great. Great salary, wonderful benefits, prestige, security, the house, the boat, the condo, the trips on the corporate jet. Yet every conversation came back to the same sentence. I don't think this is who I am anymore. What fascinated me wasn't that they were afraid because they hated their job. They were afraid because they loved the life that they had built. Walking away meant disappointing people, starting over, learning new skills, facing uncertainty. Eventually I asked, what if your fear isn't telling you to stay? What if it's telling you that this decision matters? That question changed everything. Months later, they told me, I realized I wasn't afraid because it was wrong. I was afraid because it was right. Have you ever experienced that? Sometimes our greatest fear accompanies our greatest calling, not because Spirit is pushing us, but because we're growing. Because every new chapter requires saying goodbye to an old one, right? Can't start the next chapter until you've finished the current chapter. Science of Mind teaches that growth is the very nature of life. Life is forever expressing itself in new ways. We're all here to learn, to grow, and to expand. And when we're complete with that process, we release this biodegradable flesh suit and we move on to whatever is next, yeah? So if we're living, we're changing. And if we're changing, we'll occasionally feel uncertain. That isn't failure. That's evidence that life is still unfolding in us and for us and through us. So the third thing I want to invite you into is fierce clarity in action. And that is that clarity isn't merely something we think about, it becomes something we live. Fierce clarity moves us from reaction into intentional action. It aligns our deepest values with the choices we make every day. And I love that, because spirituality isn't measured by what happens during 1 hour during our time here together. It's measured by what happens on Monday morning, when the phone rings, when you get that text, when the diagnosis comes, when the budget is tight, when the kids are sick, when the relationship becomes difficult, when the unexpected happens. That's where clarity becomes real. Ernest Holmes taught that thought combined with feeling becomes creative power, as Russell alluded in his comments. Our lives move in the direction of the consciousness we cultivate. In my more common understanding, what we think about, we bring about. Yeah? You've heard that before. So the question isn't, will fear show up? It will. The question is, what consciousness will I choose when it does? Will I choose scarcity or possibility? Judgment or curiosity? Isolation or connection? Fear or faith? Every day we answer those questions, not once, but hundreds of times. And little by little, those small choices become our character. Our character becomes our destiny, and our destiny becomes our legacy. And that brings me to something exciting happening right here at New Dawn. As many of you know, and as you heard in the announcements, we've been dreaming together about launching our children's church for the better part of this year. After today's service, we'll be finalizing our plans, pulling everything together to submit the plan to our leadership council, hopefully for final approval to be able to launch our children's church program next month. And I hope you'll stay. If you've been a part of the process, if you haven't been a part of the process, we would love your energy, your thoughts, your ideas, your support, however you choose to participate. And trust me, just because you show up doesn't mean you're going to get signed up for 4 things. So, and why? Why now? Why are we doing this? Because investing in children is one of the clearest acts of faith that I know. Children ask wonderful questions, sometimes impossible questions, as any parent in the room would know. Questions adults have forgotten to ask. They remind us that curiosity is holy, wonder is spiritual, and imagination is sacred. We're not simply creating another program. We're creating a place where children can discover that they are loved, that they belong, and that the divine has been expressing itself through them from the very beginning. That is fierce clarity in action. We're choosing to invest not just in today's congregation, but in tomorrow's spiritual leaders. And every one of us has the opportunity to help build that future. So whether you volunteer, encourage, pray, or simply cheer us on, you're helping create a spiritual home where young people can grow into the fullness of who they already are. I can't think of a better investment, because when children learn early that love is stronger than fear, the whole world benefits. So what does this look like for us here at New Dawn? What does it look like in our everyday lives? How do we take today's message with us when we step out of the sanctuary? So here are 3 things I invite you to consider this week. First, Let fear ask the question, and don't let it write the answer. The next time fear shows up, instead of immediately trying to silence it, simply become curious. Ask yourself, what is this fear trying to protect? What opportunity might be hiding behind this uncertainty? If I knew love was guiding me, what would I do next? Fear may have valuable information, and spirit always has greater wisdom. Second, take one courageous step. Notice I didn't say 10 steps or a giant leap, just one. Maybe it's making the phone call you've been avoiding. Maybe it's beginning the exercise program you've been talking about. Maybe it's forgiving someone, asking for help. Maybe it's finally saying yes to something God has been nudging you toward for years. Small acts of courage have a way of becoming life-changing events. Every meaningful journey begins with one faithful step. Third, my personal favorite, help someone else discover their courage. Sometimes the greatest gift we can offer another person isn't advice, it's encouragement. It's believing in them before they're able to believe in themselves. Every one of us remembers someone who saw something in us before we saw it in ourselves. A parent, a coach, a teacher, a counselor, a minister, a friend, someone who quietly said, I think you can do this. This week, be that person for someone else, because courage is contagious. When one person chooses faith over fear, others discover they can do the same. And that's what we're creating together at New Dawn, a community where people don't have to pretend that they're fearless, a community where it's safe to be human, where questions are welcome, where growth is celebrated, and where every one of us is encouraged to become the fullest expression of God who created us to be here. So this week's contemplative question that we started with was, what if fear isn't a warning, but a doorway to clarity? After spending this week with Ernest Holmes and Gerald May, I think the answer is yes. Fear often stands at the doorway of our next chapter, not because Spirit wants us to suffer, but because growth almost always asks something of us. It asks us to stretch. It asks us to trust. It asks us to let go. It asks us to become. Holmes reminds us that divine life intends for each of us to discover ourselves as unique expressions of infinite spirit. Fear doesn't have to stop that discovery, my friends. In fact, sometimes it becomes the very thing that points us toward that. So perhaps the invitation isn't to become fearless. The invitation is to become faithful. Faithful enough to trust the next step. Faithful enough to stay open at the top. Faithful enough to believe even when we can't see the entire path. God already can. And isn't that what Open at the Top has been teaching us all this year? To stay receptive, to stay teachable, to stay available to something greater than our own limited thinking. Because when we do, I can tell you, fear won't disappear. It does lose its authority. Love becomes our compass. Spirit becomes our guide. And clarity becomes the natural result of walking with God. If you would please join me in prayer. Practitioners and ministers, please rise and join me in consciousness. Infinite presence, we are grateful that you are always larger than our fears. Thank you for walking beside us through every uncertainty, every unanswered question, and every unfamiliar road. Help us remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but the quiet confidence that love is already present. When fear whispers that we are not enough, may we hear your voice reminding us that we are whole. When fear tells us to remain small, may we remember that you created us to grow. When fear urges us to retreat, may we discover the strength to take one more faithful step. Bless this spiritual community. Bless every family represented here today. And we give special thanks for the exciting new chapter unfolding through our children's church. May every child who walks through our doors know that they are cherished, celebrated, and deeply loved. Bless every volunteer, every teacher, every parent, every grandparent, and every person who is helping bring this vision to life. May we create a place where curiosity is honored, kindness is practiced, laughter is abundant, and every young person discovers the divine presence already alive within them. May we leave this place today with open minds, hopeful hearts, and a renewed willingness to trust your guidance. Wherever fear appears this week, may clarity follow. Wherever uncertainty arises, may faith answer. Wherever we go, may love lead the way. We are grateful, and we anchor this together by saying, and so it is, and so I am, and so we are.
In the footsteps of those who've gone before, and the road I'm traveling on will lift me up and make me strong. So when people ask me what this journey's for, I'll take one step in the right direction. If I touch one heart along the way, if that one step becomes a chain reaction, journey has not been in vain. I know no countries, I know no governments, I just know the people I've had the joy to meet. And the only flag I know is this banner that I'll show when you see me walking down the street. Oh, if I take one step in the right direction, if I touch one heart along the way, and if that one step becomes a chain reaction, then my journey has not been in vain. I get inspiration from the words of the children. I'm trying to teach myself what they already know. If I could show my fellow man what a child can understand, then the seeds that I have sown will surely grow. If I take one step in the right direction, if I touch one heart along the way, and if that one step becomes a chain reaction, then my journey has not been in vain. Yes, if I take one step in the right direction, if I touch one heart along the way, if that one step becomes a chain reaction, then my journey has not been